namaste and welcome. And today we will start with a very important course of our UPSC preparation, which is basically the Indian history. So, Indian history, if we have to study, so history basically is present in the UPSC syllabus. Now, history has three parts to it. One is basically the Indian history, another which is given as is the world history, and then the rest part is the post-independent history. Okay, post-independence history that we call. So, this world history and post-independence history, they are the part of your they're the part of your mains preparation. Okay, while this Indian history is basically part of your prelims as well as mains both. So in Indian history is basically, again, there are three parts like ancient history, medieval history, and modern history. Apart from that, there is a little topic of art and culture also, which is very intricately linked to this Indian history topic, but we do it separately because there are a lot of other topics like classical dances, like folk music, classical music, etc., which we generally do not cover in this Indian history portion. So art and culture, some elements will definitely be there in this Indian history portion, but not extensive coverage because it's a separate topic in itself. Okay, so as I've already done few courses with you guys, and I'm assuming that you guys, because of the response that you have given me guys and the love that you have given to the Pramesh e-library also, we have started with this course of Indian history. Okay, and in this we'll be starting from ancient, finishing till modern. Okay, this can be like your one-stop solution to the entire history preparation, and trust me that after this course you might not need to go anywhere else, because in this course what we have taken is the reference of Tamil Nadu books. I know it is very different because a lot of like people who are prepping for these this examination, and specifically even the coaching institute that are teaching, they do not consider this book. Okay, but the point is, this book has extensively covered something called as the Southern Indian history. Okay, Sangamesh, Pallavas, Cholas, Chalukyas, Rashtrakutas. So all these empires and Vijayanagara Empire, etc. Like if you see the last 4-5 years of pattern of history, you will realize that UPSC has started asking questions on these kingdoms very specifically. Like a lot of questions on these kingdoms, like Kakatiyas, Varangals, and Chalukyas, Rashtrakutas. So that means what? You need to shift your preparation accordingly. And these chapters are not extensively covered in any other book as extensively they are covered in this Tamil Nadu book. So what we are going to do is basically we have to take one book as a reference so that we have a very synchronized way of going around things. So we have taken Tamil Nadu book as a reference, but I, being your instructor and your mentor for this course, I have made sure that I have taken and completed my, my notes or my understanding about this one particular topic from holistically from so many other books. NCRT are covered, even like some reference books have been taken. Okay, even the notes which are available in the market, probably like some famous teachers' notes. So they all have been compiled into one particular thing. Okay, so on the slide, you might not find these things written, but I'll be dictating them to you, and I assume that you'll be sitting with the pen and paper and writing them down, because I want to make sure that this course is your one-step solution for your prelims as well as your mains preparation. So we will go one by one. We'll see how your response is coming through your ancient history chapters, and if you like it, then only we'll proceed with the medieval and the modern history. Okay, so today we will start with the ancient history, and as soon as we finish ancient history, we'll see what was the response. Are you guys loving it or not, or do you feel it's a repetitive course? Because I don't feel it's repetitive. I've never seen someone coming or covering extensively. If I would have gotten this during my preparation, it would have been amazing. Okay, so I don't want you to feel the same pain that I have felt, and that is why it's an effort from my side to reduce your pain, your efforts, and to ensure that you get a very smooth kind of notes at least to learn. Okay, before that, this course has been presented to you by Pramesh e-library, and they have been providing like amazing courses to you. Like before also, they have been providing you like Hindu subscriptions. So please like, review, and comment, and also join. Like they have come out with very beautiful wall charts for polity, for geography, for history. So this will help you a lot in your preparation, because these wall charts can be stuck or like for once in some, like at your wall, at your cupboard, and then you can revise like entire polity, entire history in like one wall chart. Okay, before we proceed, this is your educator and mentor for the course. My name is Supriya Singhal. I've appeared in UPSC Forest Services examination and interview as well for CSC as well, and I have a blog by Crispy Stories on Instagram, so do follow. And I'm very regular here, and I am conducting a lot of challenges, so that way we can have a good interaction also. Now, so we will start with this unit 1. Okay, now So this is, again telling you, this is basically what, this is your Tamil Nadu book. Okay, so Tamil Nadu book has been taken. I'm going to be explaining you each and every line, and wherever I feel that, you know, some extra points are needed and you need to understand these things, or these things were extra in NCRT, or these things are mentioned in some other book, I'm going to be dictating them to you. So please be ready with your pen and paper. Do not take this as your revision course. Take it, but also sit with a pen and paper. Otherwise, you will be feeling you have to again listen to the entire like video. Okay, so we'll start with the first chapter of today, which is basically India's, its geographical features and their impact on history. Okay, so India, as we all know today, is not the India what existed before. Okay, India as we know today is very different from what existed before. India was then basically what we call as an Indian subcontinent today is basically what was the India of before. So if India today is this much, you will realize that India in those times was basically this much. Okay, it was really, really big. It used to be an Indian subcontinent. So, you will find that history, if you talk about, see, history is what we saw na, history is my story. So basically everybody writes history in their own perspective. Okay, so history can be written in two forms. Either it can be written like in timeline form, what we are studying like ancient, medieval or modern. Okay, or it can be related to a geographical form. Geographical matlab history of India, history of China, history of Egypt, etc. Basically either you're dividing history in the time form, or you're dividing history into the space form. Okay, spatial or temporal view. Okay, so you will realize that the history is what? History is basically a collection of lot of events that have happened in the past. Okay, and somebody must have written those events. Some, you might find some evidence related to those events, and that is why you are able to build that history either temporally or spatially. Okay, and now you will realize that Indian geographical features actually intricately linked to our history, because you will realize it's Indian geography that has made invasions from some places very common, invasions from other places not so common. Okay, if I tell you that there were very few invasions in India from the southern side, like from the peninsular India side, the one which is surrounded by the Indian Ocean, Arabian Sea and Bay of Bengal, it is because not lot of empires back then had a very mighty marine shipments and marine equipments, so they could not travel and cross these oceans and come to India just like that. Okay, you needed very specific technologies. So hence you will find that most of the invasions that are happening in India are happening from this northwestern frontier, because eastern frontier is again protected by something called as mighty Himalayas. Okay, like lofty Himalayas, mighty peaks. So obviously it's very, very hard to cross them, and you need to have specific passes, and those passes are also open only in specific time of the year. Okay, for example, a lot of these Himalayan passes, they are not open during the winter time, because already they are covered by the snow. That means what, you have a very small window to cross them. So hence you will find that the maximum opportunity anybody got to invade India was through this particular sector, like the northwestern India. Okay, Indian subcontinent, as I told you, was a previous India, like the earlier India I'm talking about, and it was divided majorly into three regions. This you have studied in your geography part. What was it? Plains, plateaus, and plains, mountains, and peninsula region. Okay, so you have basically Himalayan mountains on the top, then you have Indo-Gangetic plains, and then you have this peninsular portion. Okay, so these are like the geographical divisions of India. Okay, now in Indian subcontinent, if you talk about countries, like what constituted Indian subcontinent back then. So basically you will find that today is India, today is Pakistan, today is Bangladesh, today is Nepal and Bhutan. So 5 countries, like the 5 countries which are basically our land, you can say neighbors. What are those? Fast, just repeat with me. There is India, there is Nepal, there is Bhutan, there is Bangladesh, there is Pakistan, and there is this one, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Bhutan. So these are 5 countries. Okay, so these 5 countries are called as the Indian subcontinent. Okay, remember, we do not have our marine neighbors Sri Lanka and Maldives in this. We do not have Afghanistan in this, or we don't have China. Remember, China was never considered as a part of an Indian subcontinent, because China already is a very vast country as you know it, and it has a very different ecosystem. It's a temperate country. Okay, so you cannot consider it under one subcontinent, because subcontinent is supposed to be like a one bigger unit having a similar geographical and climatic conditions. Okay, so never get confused why China was not there. Now, if you can see amongst these also, which is like the bulkiest or the biggest size country, obviously it's the India. Okay, and today this figure has changed. Okay, this figure has changed. So this you need to tell me specifically, because state of Jammu Kashmir is no longer there and has been converted into 2 union territories of Ladakh and union territory of Jammu and Kashmir. So after this change, and also a change of the union territory of Daman and Diu and Dadra and Nagar Haveli have been merged together, you need to tell me how many states does India have today and how many union territories does India have today. Okay, today, as in like the point I'm talking about right now. Okay, so And the 2011 census, because the data has been updated, and you also know that 2021 census will be conducted soon. And you need to tell me that what are the special features about 2021 census, because this has been in news and you must be reading news to clear prelims. So 2021 census has some very peculiar features about it, which you need to mention in the comment box below. Okay, so 2011 census, you already know that India's population has crossed 130. How much? So it is already crossing 1200 million or 1300 million. Okay, 130 crore is roughly the population that we call. Now we will talk about each of these systems in little bit details. So we'll start with the Himalayan mountain system. So we know that Himalayan mountains, they are situated where? So they are situated in the north of India. And you should also know that these Himalayan mountain system are also something what we call as biodiversity hotspots. Okay, so what are these biodiversity hotspots? Biodiversity hotspots have been given by whom? So they have been given by a body called, organization called as Conservation International. So you know that there are how many biodiversity hotspots in India? 4. So what you need to do is you need to write in the comment box below what are these biodiversity hotspots names. Okay, like 4 biodiversity hotspots are there in India. I want names of them written in the comment box below. This way we will ensure that while studying history, you are revising geography, environment, economy, polity, whatever we can. Okay, so to make sure that you get maximum out of this. Now, what is happening? See, there is something called as, if you have heard in geography, there's something called as Pamir Knot. Okay, this Pamir Knot is in extreme northwest of India, somewhere like on the top of Jammu Kashmir, you can call it here. Okay, and this Pamir Knot, you will find that it is a starting point of many mountains from here and then here. Okay, so you can see that starting from the Pamir in the extreme northwest, these Himalayas, these mighty Himalayan range, then they actually go till northeast. That we know already. Okay, and we also know that they have 3 divisions. Like there is outer Himalayas, in Shivaliks, in outer Himalayas, Shivaliks, inner Himalayas, and then there is greater Himalayas. Okay, and approximately the length is around 2500 kilometers. And the breadth we already know is around somewhere around 240 to 300 kilometers. Okay, this is all the information mentioned in your geography books. Okay, the highest peak in the Himalayan ecosystem is basically what we find in Nepal, which is Mount Everest. Okay, and the roughly the height is around 8800 meters. Okay, the height of Mount Everest is changing, by the way, because if you know the Mount Everest has been constructed because of the plate movements. Okay, between what? Between 2 plates, which is basically Indo-Eurasian and Indo-Australian and Eurasian plate. So because of these plates are striking each other continuously, you will realize that the Himalayan ecosystem also faces a lot of these earthquakes. Okay, then if you remember the Nepal earthquake that came in 2015. Okay, then these Himalayan mountains, Himalayan mountains, they are not only basically just one of these geographical features that we have in India. They are very, very important from perspective of a lot of things. So if you are getting rainfall, now imagine, suppose if you are getting these southwest rainfalls, if there was no Himalaya, these southwest rainfalls might have crossed like this region and went into China or Tibet. But what is happening? Because of these Himalayas, they are striking Himalayas and coming back. That means they are forced to basically shed their waters in India. So that is why we getting this good monsoon rainfall. Then secondly, because of these Himalayas, like invaders, at least from this particular section, northeast section, could not invade India. So they acted like a natural wall and protected India. Then what about the cold winds? We already know that, there is something called as Gobi Desert and Taklamakan Desert, okay, present in this region. Okay, which are the cold deserts. But now tell me, if they have cold deserts and they are just like our neighbors, so why doesn't India have a cold desert? We instead have a very hot desert called as Thar Desert, but we don't have a cold desert apart from the Ladakh in the north. So you will realize that is because of this Himalayas, because these Himalayas are protecting us from these Central Asian these Central Asian winds, okay, which are very, very cold and which are very they're coming from directly from the Arctic, but Himalayas are acting as a barrier and not letting them allowed to pass through the region and come to India. Okay, so that is why you realize that India is actually considered as a tropical country. Even though if you realize that India, basically the Tropic of Cancer is passing just in the middle. Okay, 23.5 degree line, which is also called as the Tropic of Cancer, is passing just in the middle of India through 8 states. Remember, what was it? Gujarat, Rajasthan, MP, Chhattisgarh, then West Bengal, Tripura, Mizoram. Then there is still one state missing that you need to tell. Okay, so there are 8 states through which Tropic of Cancer passes through India, and write in the comment box below. Okay, so you will realize that you must be saying that India is half tropical and half temperate, but it is not. India is generally considered a tropical country because of this presence of Himalayan ecosystem, which is protecting us from the temperate type of climate and also ensuring that our monsoonal character remains. Okay, and Himalayan region we already know is very difficult to survive. It's very inhospitable because it's very cold climate, very like cool winds etc blowing, and like there's scarcity of water because water is in the frozen form. Okay, and that is why you say that Ladakh is a cold desert. There is like there is very less precipitation also happening, and like it is mostly frozen in snow. Like a lot of activities can't happen throughout the year, so you will realize that it is generally covered with snow only. Okay, now so we already know now that Himalayans have basically Himalayas are a natural barrier to what, to protect India against invasions also, because I told you that it is very difficult to cross them. But we also know that there have been invasions in the past, and why have they been there? Because of the passes. Now, before we move forward, you need to understand what are passes. See, passes you can call as a plain region between two mountains. Okay, passes cannot be something like what you have constructed like a road or something. No, passes are generally like, suppose these are two lofty mountains and there is like this portion, okay, which is like a plain area, and which has basically providing you a path to cross these. Okay, so these passes, like there are many passes, okay, in the entire Himalayan ecosystem, and you will find that you have to learn these passes because this is mentioned in prelims also. So if you have heard about, there are passes like Karakoram Pass in the Greater Himalayan region, then there is Janskar, then there is Pir Panjal, then there is Baradulla Pass, okay, in this here somewhere upper, and then you have this Rotang Pass, etc., Baralachala, etc. Then you have Ligbu Lake, then you have here Nathula, Jalepla. Okay, so all these passes you already need to remember. So what are we going to study here? We are going to study here some passes which are very important from the perspective of invasions. Okay, so you will realize that in our northwest, okay, so if I have to draw India something like this, so you will write in the northwest region where basically Pakistan, and then here Pakistan was there and here Afghanistan. There are a lot of passes here. Okay, so one is the Khyber Pass, then other is the Bolan Pass, then there is Kurram Pass, and then there is Gumal Pass. Okay, these were actually passes which allowed or which basically facilitated the movement of people or invading of people from Central Asia to India. Okay, and these passes are situated in which ranges? So there is Hindu Kush, Suleiman, and Kirtar ranges. Okay, so these three ranges you need to remember. What are these? Hindu Kush, Suleiman, and Kirtar ranges through which these passes are present. Okay, and we already know that. We already know what? We already know that there have been a lot of invasions from this northwest region. Okay, if you remember, like who all came from this north. So if you remember the name of Darius, okay, Xerxes, Xarius, and then so these are all the Persian players. Then there was Alexander the Great also. Okay, then there was Indo-Greeks, then there was Huns, then there was Turks. Okay, then there was Scythians, there was Parthians. So all of these people, they traveled from this Central Asian part and via these passes through northwest of India. So that is why I'm telling you this course is like complete information. Okay, I'm telling you everything from before and past so that you can relate to things in a much easier way. Now, many people who came to India through these passes, basically I already told you, either they were immigrants or they came as for invading. Okay, even when we had this Gori and Ghazni coming, they were basically, one of them came for invading India, like for basically just looting India. Another one wanted to establish an empire here. So difference of perspective also matters. So I already told you Indo-Aryans, Greeks, Parthians, Akas, Kushans, Huns, Turks, they all entered India through these passes. Okay. Now the most important thing here that you need to remember is the Swat Valley, because it is here that Alexander the Great actually came to India. Okay. Alexander basically belonged to Macedonia. Okay. Macedonian Empire. So he basically came to India through this route, and you already know that. See, now tell me, if these routes are being used for invasions, won't these routes be used for exports and imports and trading also? Answer is yes. So you will find that these were the routes through which a lot of art and cultural exchange also was happening between people. Like a lot of people were coming to India, merchants were coming to India, ambassadors were coming to India. Okay, armies were traveling to India, even missionaries were traveling to India to spread their religion, etc. So you will find that these northwest passes, okay, they have been what you call as an India's gateway to the world, because it is through these passes that we actually got to taste the culture of the different regions of the world. Okay. So I already told you that in Kashmir we have something called as the Karakoram range. Okay, the second highest peak in the world. What is the second highest peak in the world? Okay, you need to tell me in the comment because you studied in geography. And then Mount Godwin Austen is already I told you as situated here, and that this part of Himalaya already know, and its passes are highly very highly elevated, and they are also snow covered in the winter, and that is why it's very difficult to cross them. Okay, so you will find that these passes are difficult, but the Central Asian passes are a little easier. Then the Valley of Kashmir, you already know, is basically surrounded. Valley is what something you call valley as basically what you call as the foothills of mountains. Okay, so this Valley of Kashmir has been surrounded by high mountains, and it also has several passes. And Kashmir Valley, you already know, is very like famous for its unique culture, its tradition, like those costumes, like colorful costumes, etc. And Nepal is also a small valley because we know that they have a plain region. Okay, and in this plain region only, you must know that Nepal faced its major constitutional crisis because they could not decide how to divide a country to ensure there is a representation of hill tribes also, or hilly people, and also the plain region. Okay, so if you remember these plain region people, Madhesis, okay, so these Madhesis, and there was like tribes called Tharus, etc. So they had differences over how Nepal should be divided and in districts, and how the constitution should be made, specifically after the the coup happened, and there was a constitutional you can say instability in Nepal. Okay, so Nepal, you already know, is also present in the foothills of Himalayas only, and it is also accessible through either plain areas or through basically certain passes. Now you have discussed about the passes in the west, passes in the northwest, and passes in like little north. Now you will go towards northeast portion of India. Okay, so you will realize that in India, Himalayas are extended towards till Assam. Okay, and the important passes in this region, like starting from here, there's Sikkim, then there is Bhutan, and then there is Arunachal Pradesh, and then there is Assam, etc. So if you have to talk about passes, you will find Nathula, Jhalepla. Okay, then there is Bamla, Bomdila. Okay, and then there is here also you have so many ranges like Patkai Bam, Naga, Mizo, ठीक है, Lushai, and Abhor, Mishmi, Nishi, etc. So Garo, Khasi, Jaintia. So these are the hills, and then there are passes present in these hills to connecting each other. Okay. And these hills, what is so special about these northeastern hills? That these are highly, highly thickly forested. Okay, because what is happening, if you realize that Tropic of Cancer starts from, see, you should always remember things via logic. Never try to just cram them. So if you have to make a map of India, something like this. Okay, so you will realize that Tropic of Cancer starts like here, but it eventually crosses something like this. Okay, that means what, your northeastern region, okay, I'll just make it something like this. So northeastern region is majorly basically falling around Tropic of Cancer, and that is why you will find that it has a lot of rainfall also. It has influence, it is very closer to the ocean also. It has basically good amount of rainfall, thickly forested. Okay, and because of these thick forests, you can find that it has been a very nerve center of insurgency also. And this was the question asked in this year's mains, like 2019 mains, about the northeastern insurgency, and how basically India and Myanmar can actually control it. Okay, the mountains of these northeastern region, they are difficult to cross, obviously, and that is why you'll find that they have sometimes we can definitely say that northeast has been little aloof from these Indian mainland, but now government has been taking efforts, be it in terms of infrastructure development, in terms of cultural exchange programs, in terms of basically Act East policy, Act East via Northeast policy, constructing like a lot of highways, etc., like IMT highway, India Myanmar Thailand highway, Kalada and multimodal transportation system, so that you can integrate northeastern India within India in a much more easier manner, much more facilitative manner. Okay, after discussing Himalayas, we will discuss about Indo-Gangetic plains. Okay, so now tell me, where will Indo-Gangetic plain lie? So this plain is one of the largest plains, if you can call it. Okay, and which is basically drained by a lot of rivers. So basically there is Indus River here on the top, and then there is Ganges, and then there is Brahmaputra here. So you will realize this Indo-Gangetic plain is basically a vast plain which is basically irrigated by three important rivers, Indus, Ganga and Brahmaputra. Okay, and the vast plain is basically made up of alluvial soil because of the silt and sand that has been brought by these rivers. So basically it's a very, very fertile region, and here you will find two things. First is basically extensive population because of the presence of large amount of water which can fulfill all your needs, like machine needs, industry needs, agriculture needs, drinking water, and living needs. And also secondly, the presence of extensive agriculture. Okay, so you will find that people here practice like agriculture as their main option. Okay, so they are basically, you can call what we call as like a bowl of India, like green bowl of India, rice bowl of India, etc. Okay, so Indo-Gangetic plain, I already told you, and then we'll talk about each of these river systems. So one is the Indus. Okay, so you will, you should remember that there is, if this is Lake Mansarovar, then here is somewhere Indus, then there is then here only Brahmaputra, but somewhere here like Gangotri Glacier we have Ganges. Okay, coming from as a Bhagirathi first. So now in this system, we already know it is called as the Panchnath system because it has very famous like five tributaries: Jhelum, Chenab, Ravi, Beas, and Satluj. Okay, and this along with Indus, basically they drain this Punjab, Haryana, Himachal Pradesh region, and these Punjab plains we already know this Panj Ab. Okay, it means Panch plus Ab. Okay, Ab means do Ab. Okay, the region drained by the rivers, and Panch means five rivers. So basically, area which is drained by the five rivers. That is why it is called as the Punjab. And we already know that even the Sindh region, which is present in today's Pakistan, here only basically Indus goes and merges with the Arabian Sea. Okay, that is why Sindh region is very fertile. And it is said that when India got separated from Pakistan, okay, after independence, the Sindh region went to Pakistan, and the Sindh region was basically a major cotton growing region. Okay, and that is why India lost a very major cotton growing region, and we had to basically then ensure that India develops its industries in Gujarat and Maharashtra region to compete with the Sindh industry, the Sindh region that has gone to Pakistan. Then we know that there is a in the northwestern region we have something called as Thar Desert, and Thar Desert is a hub of Desert National Park. Okay, so so this Thar Desert and Aravalli Hills are situated, and Aravalli Hills we already know these are old fold mountains. Okay, and these are one of the oldest mountains in the world, and they are also situated in the northwestern. So if this is an Indo-Gangetic plain, you will realize that here in the northwestern part of it, you have Aravalli Hills and Thar Desert. Okay, and Mount Abu is the highest peak which is present in the Guru Shikhar. Guru Shikhar is the peak name, and Mount Abu is the highest mountain system in this Aravallis. Okay, and Aravalli is around 800 kilometers, running around roughly. It can be 700 to 800 kilometers, running from basically Delhi, Raisina Hills until Gujarat. Okay, Girnar ranges, etc. Then you will find these Ganges river. It starts from Himalayas. Okay, then it flows south. It gets merged with a lot of rivers like Yamuna, etc. Then Ghagra, Gandak, Kosi from the top, and then there are another rivers like Son, etc. And then finally it flows basically via West Bengal to Bangladesh. Okay, and then in Bangladesh it merges with Brahmaputra, and then it becomes the another river. Okay, now. So this we have already studied. See, Sarayu, if you have been watching Ramayana these days, because it has been like this is the period of quarantine, and like government has started on DD National Ramayana. So there's a talk of Ayodhya. Okay, and Ayodhya is nothing but basically situated on river Sarayu. Okay, and river Sarayu is basically tributary of river Ganga. Okay, so these all you need to study, and we will study, actually the important 16 what we call as Mahajanpadas that existed before. Like we'll be studying at around 600 BC when we'll be coming to that particular point of time. I will make you remember all these 16 mega like these Mahajanpadas along with their capitals and also on the river that they are present, so that you remember exactly the chronology of it, because UPSC has started asking questions on this, and these are like the difficult questions which like a lot of people do not cover because information is not available. Okay. So you will find that the river Brahmaputra, it rises beyond the Himalayas, it flows across the Tibet and then basically continues through the plains of northeast. That we already know. Basically it starts from here, it is called as Sangpo and Rangpo, and then basically it enters via a gorge, okay, in the Hang Gorge, and then it enters India, and then it flows through Assam, basically through turns and twists. Okay, here only in Assam you have something called as Majuli Island, okay, which is the highest riverine island in the world, largest, and then after that it flows through Bangladesh. Okay. Then this Indo-Gangetic plain we already know. I have already told you that it is a it has a major urban centers also. Okay, and then it has a confluence of lot of rivers also. Here only you will find that we have a place called as Haridwar. Okay, and a place called as Allahabad, where basically this Kumbh Mela happens. Okay, then this Vedic culture. So after this, okay, we will be starting with this Vedic culture. After we studying with like Harappan Valley civilization. So this Vedic culture, you must remember, it started with Indus, but then it in the later Vedic times it moved towards Gangetic plains. Okay, so very important, if you'll find cities, they are present on this Indo-Gangetic area. Okay, like Banaras, Delhi, Ayodhya, I already told you, Agra, Delhi, Patliputra, even in West Bengal side also, you'll find like a lot of these cities, important cities are present on these Indo-Gangetic rivers. Okay, city of Patliputra is which becomes the later capital of Magad Empire. You will find that it was situated on River Son. Okay, and where it was River Son was basically actually joining Ganges. So confluence of rivers. Therefore, it was a very fertile ecosystem. Okay, and Patliputra. That is why you will find that see, in ancient times you did not have much facilities. So you wanted a capital which is fulfilled in itself, that even if there is an enemy attack, the capital itself is available to fend, to fend itself, to take care of the needs of the people. So you cannot be making a capital in an area which does not have water. So you need to have a capital where there is enough water, there is enough fertile soil so that agriculture can be produced. There is enough, presence of like mountains, etc., so that they act as a natural barrier. And that is why you realize that even in the medieval times, like a lot of these Rajputana forts and even the forts of Marathas, they were present on hills, so that even if they place a capital in one of these forts, they are enough to actually defend them from the enemy. Okay. The most important city on the western side of Gangetic Plain we already know is Delhi, and most of the decisive battles, okay, they were fought in Panipat, okay, and Kurukshetra region. And this has been a question asked in mains, okay, that why was Panipat like a important platform or place for fighting battles, okay? What were the characteristics about Panipat that made it an important area with respect to battles? Like there were three battles fought in Panipat: Battle of Panipat first, second, and three. One was the first battle fought between Babar and Lodhis, basically when Babar started Mughal Empire and defeated Delhi Sultanate. And second was fought between Akbar and Hemu, and the third was fought between this one. Third was fought between Marathas and Ahmad Shah Abdali. Okay, so that is how these three battle of Panipats were fought, and that is why Panipat gained this lot of traction. Okay, so now you will find that this Ganga Yamuna Doab, we already know it's a very fertile region, and a lot of contested area also. And in ancient times, I already told you it was difficult to make roads, and so men and material, they were to be moved by boat, and that is why these rivers were very important for running your economy also, because it was very easy to go by boats and transfer materials also, and they also acted as a good source of communication. Okay, so now we have discussed two parts. One is the Himalayan, other is the Indo-Gangetic plain part of it. Now we will move towards the southern peninsula part. Okay, the peninsula part, this part. Okay, so in the geography, you must have divided this peninsula part into like Deccan Peninsula, and then you must have divided into the Central Highlands, and then this, northeastern, northeastern plateau region in geography when you have been studying. Okay, but here we will just look at from the history point of view also, that these, see, southern peninsula is basically, you already know Narmada and Tapi, and Vindhyas and Satpura region. Okay, so Vindhya and Satpura mountains along with Narmada and Tapti, we already know. Okay, Narmada and Tapti are these west flowing rivers. Okay, and they basically get into Gulf of Khambat. Okay, so river Tapti is the these are basically flowing into Gulf of Khambat, and they are a great dividing line between northern and southern India. Even if you remember that there was a king called Harsha, which we'll be studying around in 600 AD. He was not able to cross and come to South India and invade South India because of these natural barriers of Narmada, Tapti, and Vindhyas and Satpura, because it's very difficult to cross the natural barriers. Okay, and here you will find that it is basically consisting of volcanic rock. Okay, because it's a Deccan Plateau region, remember, and it has been constructed from the it is a part of the ancient plateau of the Gondwana land, which was formed by the volcanic rocks. Okay, and that is why it is different from the northern mountains, which are mostly sedimentary in nature. Okay, all these rocks are easier cut into, and we also already know that here are a lot of rock cut monasteries and temples in the Deccan region. Okay, now Deccan Plateau we already know is basically has Eastern Ghats, and there's something called as the Western Ghats. Okay, and Western Ghats we already know there is basically there is Konkan coast. Okay, then there is this Mangalore coast, and then there is this Kerala coast also, and here you have northern Sarkars and Coromandel coast. Okay, and these Western Ghats we already know that they are basically running along the Arabian Sea line. Okay, and here you have basically in Western Ghats you have a lot of mountains also, and in Western Ghats you will find that there are a lot of monasteries, especially of Buddhism, like there is Ajanta, Ellora, and then here only you will find there are Kanheri caves, okay, Karle caves. And in the Deccan Plateau, here in the eastern side, you will find it's a very flanked region. Okay, it's a flanked region like this, and there are a lot of you can say artificial like ports have been constructed on this particular line. Okay, starting from Chennai, then Vizag, etc. Then here you will find that the language and culture, see, one question that has been asked in mains, like in the earlier times, like when there were like 5-marker questions being asked in the mains examination, there was a question that why the southern Indian, you will find in southern India, their language and culture has been, preserved for a longer amount of time. Even if you see the classical languages of India or classical dances, you will find most of these dances and languages are from the southern Indian empire and southern India, and they have been conserved in their ancient forms only, because southern India was protected from the foreign invasions. Okay, it was very difficult to cross these mountains and rivers to cross to South India, and that is why a lot of these emperors who invaded also, they basically stayed in the north. Okay, and secondly, they were protected by the oceans. Okay, so southern India, you will remember that if you have to cross, and also in southern India, you will find that they also had these ghat system, and they also had these huge mountains, and that is why you needed passes. Okay, so you will find that in southern end remains this Palghat Pass. Okay, there are many ghats. Okay, there is Palghat, there is Thorghat, there is Bhorghat. Okay, and this Palghat Pass has been asked in the prelims examination before. Okay, wherein basically it was a passage, basically ghats connecting, where you can say basically connecting link between Kaveri Valley to the Malabar coast, like Tamil Nadu to this Kerala region. There's this Palghat Pass. Okay, and it was an important trade route, especially for the Indo-Roman trade. You know why? Because Indo-Roman trade was majorly happening around this region. Okay, Arika Medu, what we call as Pondicherry today. So this was their major port, and they used to cross this Palghat Pass and basically gather the material from the Western Ghat region, like the spices, the herbs, the ivory, etc. And then they used to trade from here. Okay, so that is I'm telling you, Indo-Roman trade. This Palghat Pass became very very important. Okay, now you tell me that in Western Ghat, you must have read that the important peaks, and what is the most highest peak of this Western Ghat region? It's Anaimudi. Okay, and Dota Beta we already know is another highest peak in the Western Ghat. Okay, actually you need to tell me which is the highest peak. It is Anaimudi or Dota Beta, and if it like either one of these peaks is highest, and which one of the peak lies in Western Ghats? Sorry, which one of the peak lies in what, like which hills? Like Nilgiris, or does it lie in Cardamom Hills, etc. Okay, so then this way you can actually revise your geography also. Okay, the Eastern Ghats we already know. So Western Ghats are very very high, and Eastern Ghats, say Western Ghats height might go up to 1500 meters, etc. But Eastern Ghats are not that high, like 1000 meters, 900 meters, etc. And Eastern Ghats we already know they also have a lot of openings, and because of the rivers. So that's why I already told you that Eastern Ghats, if you find that Western Ghats are something like this, Eastern Ghats is highly flanked. Okay, because a lot of these rivers and their tributaries are flowing. Okay, and they are flanking this region, like there is Mahanadi, Godavari, Krishna, Kaveri. Apart from that, like a lot of rivers and tributaries also. Okay, and the port cities of Arikamedu, which we call as Pondicherry, Mamalapuram is what we call as Mahabalipuram, and this is the place where India-China second informal summit after Wuhan was held. And Wuhan already was in so much of news because of Corona. That is why I'm telling you, please study everything about Mamalapuram. Mamalapuram is also, the temples of Mahabalipuram are also mentioned in these UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Okay, so you need to please learn about them. And Kaveri Patnam, which was basically the Kaveri Patnam was the capital city of Chola Empire, like the earlier Sangam age wale. Okay. So now the major rivers of southern peninsula are almost running parallel, that we already know. And Mahanadi is in the eastern side of peninsula. Then there are Narmada and Tapti are basically running from east to west. And then other rivers like Godavari, which is also called as the southern Ganga. And Godavari is the largest river in the southern India. Okay, and then Krishna Tungabhadra we already know is like a tributary to Krishna. And Krishna Tungabhadra region is the basin where Vijayanagar Empire was Vijayanagar Empire was built. Okay, and these rivers we already know they have a fertile soil, and throughout this region, especially this Raichur Doab. So where is this Raichur Doab? Raichur Doab is present in this Krishna Tungabhadra region, which has remain a bone of contention because of its soil, because of its water, because of the mountains surrounding, and because of its rich forest area, which can serve like good, which can provide you animals for warfare, which can also provide you a lot of wood for construction. So that is why this region was majorly contested and remained a battleground for a lot of dynasties in the south. Okay, and we already know like Satavahanas to Vijayanagar Empire is the history of this Raichur Doab. Okay, and Kaveri Delta is a distinct geographical zone present in the far south, and it became the seat of Chola Empire. Okay, and Kaveri Basin is very rich in its unique culture, its unique tradition, and it has flourished through ancient times. Okay, and southern peninsula is already we know that India has a coastline of 7,500 kilometers, out of which almost 6,000 kilometers is India's mainland, while islands of Andaman and Nicobar and Lakshadweep, they form around 1,500 kilometers boundary. Okay, this coastline. So this 6,000 kilometer coastline is majorly flanked via southern Indian states. Okay, southern peninsular region, and that is why you will find that great deal of commerce happened through seaways from these areas. Okay, and through countries in the Roman, in Persian Empire. Okay, even in the southern eastern nations like Indonesia, like Java, Sumatra, Bali, the earlier ones, Cambodia, etc. But in today's time, we can call them as Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia, etc. Okay, and that is why you'll find that like if India has an empire, Pallava Empire, wherein they used to point like Mahendra Verma, Narseh Verma. So Varman was a surname. You will find that in one of these southeastern nations also that an empire named wherein Varman was a surname that they were adopting. The Buddhism traveled from India to Southeast Asian nations. Jainism also traveled from here also. The Tamil culture also spread from here only. So you will remind that India basically acted as a basically connecting link between the southern eastern nations and then also between the regions lying in the far like west of India. Okay, so now after having understood so much about India, India's history, and so much like little brief about geography, etc., we need to understand that India has always been a land of unity in diversity, and this is a line that you should use in your mains answers. Okay, if you need to get marks in mains, you need to have some 3-4 punchlines, some really important keywords that you should be written in your answers, and you should underline them to ensure that the examiner who's checking your copy does not ignore them. Okay, you underline them to ensure that he reads through that and he gives you marks. Okay, so history of ancient India, it has been very interesting. We already know because it has been a you can say India has emerged as a very cosmopolitan culture, like a very multifaceted culture. We have like a salad bowl theory. Okay, so wherein like a lot of cultures have come and they have assimilated, they have integrated in India but not assimilated. Like they have not lost their original touch, but they have also adopted Indian elements, and we also have adopted certain elements from them. Like starting from pre-Aryans to Indo-Aryans to Greek to Scythians to Huns to Turks, like everybody wanted to make India as their home. Okay, like even when if you talk about Mughals came to India to invade, but eventually they settled and they wanted to make India as their home. Okay, so a lot of these you will find that India has faced a lot of these cultural exchanges happening from within India and of India and the world. Okay, and all these people, they have mixed India, they have imparted their unique culture to India, and that is why you will find that India has so much of cultural diversity. Okay, India is a land of so many religions. Like, can you tell me any region in the world which has so many religions? Like, we have almost all the major religions of the world present in India. Okay, and India has witnessed the birth of so many religions also, like Buddhism, Jainism, Hinduism. And if you go to faiths and sects, then you can find enormous number of sects and faiths. Okay, and all these religions and cultures, you will find that they are somewhere or the other, they are intermingled in one another. Like when Buddhism was starting, there was Jainism starting, and then Buddhism, Jainism started, Hinduism started to reform themselves, and there was a what? There was a tradition of Bhakti and Sufi that came around. So that's what I'm telling you. All of these things are interlinked. Okay, none of them is basically separated from each other. And all these, we already know that India is a land of languages. We have so many languages coming around. If you please study about UNESCO's this languages list, wherein they are trying to actually they're trying to actually make the list of endangered languages, the languages that are extinct, etc. It is said that India is basically fourth in number in the world in amount of number of languages, which is basically 453. And in this also, India has already faced extinction of 5 languages, and we are on the verge of facing extinction of 42 languages also. Okay, so this information you will only get after you study current affairs. So I'm telling you, in this course, I'm trying to bring you all the elements what I know, like all the knowledge that I have gained through all these years will be imparted to you. Okay. And ancient, we already know basically in India, see, India was never basically just the India that we see today. I already told you India was Indian subcontinent, and you will find that there have been elements in the history which never took India as one, which never wanted India to be basically delineated in certain sects. They always wanted to see a united India. That is why we call India as a Bharat Varsha, okay, or land of Bharat. And it was a name given to the whole country, not just like one tribe or called as a Bharat tribe. Okay. And similarly, you will find that again under Ashoka, we find that under the Mauryans, we again face the similar kind of integration of entire India. Okay. Similarly, under Gupta also, there was another integration that happened. And then again in the Mughal Empire, we saw that with the Akbar. So unity of India was always, a factor which even foreigners recognized. They recognize that India can live only when it is united. And this is what I'm telling you even today also. India divided will not stand the diversity or challenges of time. India united can face any challenges. Okay. And thus you will find that, see, India started with Indus Valley civilization, and then we will go till your modern India. Okay. India has been a land of many languages like Sanskrit, Prakrit, etc. And Sanskrit was basically the language of elites, or what we call as Brahmins, and Prakrit was a language which was used by the common people. Okay, even the Ashoka's inscriptions, you can find that they were written in Prakrit language, and they were epics like Ramayana and Mahabharata. Okay, and see, Ramayana and Mahabharata are not the epics of just northern India or just the few of just Hinduism. You will find that Ramayana and Mahabharata are extensively, that the stories that you find, they are mentioned in the Malabar like palaces also. They are mentioned in like some Maharashtrian caves also. They will find these stories mentioned in like Tamil Nadu also. So like Mahabharata and Ramayana, these are the epics of entire India. Like whole India reads them. If not today, they were actually the, the books that were revered all throughout India. Okay, and originally we already know that these books were written in Sanskrit, but later on, because of their popularity, because of the stories that they were giving out, they were actually translated into a lot of these regional languages like Tamil, Bengali, Telugu, and even in Gujarati, Marathi, etc. Okay, and that is why you can technically call India as a multi-ethnic, multicultural, multi-religious, multilingual society. Okay, please use these words. What is it? Multicultural, multi-regional, multi-regional, multi-linguistic society. And unity and integrity is what we strive to achieve. And achieving unity and integrity is mentioned in our preamble also. And it is mentioned as one of the fundamental duties also. Okay, so with this, we complete the first chapter of ancient history. I know this was not very important chapter, but this was what sets the pretext. Okay, and this kind of pretext has not been given in the specifically in these NCRT book or any other book. That is why I'm telling you that Tamil Nadu book is a good source to go about. Okay, and once you start preparing from Tamil Nadu book, and extra I'm already giving you, you will realize that your entire preparation has been very synchronized. Okay, it has become very, very synchronized to exactly know what event was happening when. Even the southern Indian empires of Pallavas, Cholas, Cheras, Pandyas, okay, Rashtrakutas, Chalukyas, Satavahans, they will get extensively covered. You don't need to read them then from anywhere else. Okay, with this we'll finish this first chapter, and we'll be waiting for your reviews to ensure to see whether you want to start with the medieval India or not. Thank you.